In September 2022, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced a whopping €200 billion subsidy package to protect businesses and people from high energy prices. This subsidy was meant as a defensive shield to counter the soaring oil and gas prices. But for analysts, this move could destroy Europe's entire economy and choke off the rest of Europe. Not only this, but this subsidy plan was considered by many to cripple Europe's economy and provide a huge help to the Russian market. So being the largest economy in the European Union, Germany's act proved to be the last nail in Europe's coffin. Let's explore why a German subsidy plan could tear the entire EU into pieces. What are the factors on which Russia can indirectly leverage this subsidy? For decades, the European Union has been an umbrella framework under which policy mechanisms are widely integrated. It is a union consisting of 27 members, of which France and Germany have the largest economies. Under the EU setup, trade, movement of people, services, and capital flow within the internal European market. On top of that, EU member states have been heavily dependent on Russian oil and gas. Simply put, EU member states and Russia were economically interdependent for decades. This interdependence ensured the cheap export of Russian gas and energy to the European market. This energy kept EU economies running until the breakout of the Russian-Ukraine war. The war in Ukraine changed the whole picture of the geographical and political scenario for both parties. The US, the UK, and the EU put certain sanctions on Russia to condemn its military aggression in Ukraine. These economic sanctions were meant to economically alienate Russia. But these sanctions have not proved to be in the EU's favor. First of all, these sanctions put an embargo on Russian trade that was meant to reach European markets. So, due to the slump in Russian oil and gas, Europe's energy imports were largely impacted. Due to this, EU states had to counter hyperinflation and soaring energy prices. The EU trade with Russia dropped to a historic low in February 2022. The data show that 9.6% of the EU's imports came from Russia in February 2022, while this figure dropped to 1.7% after the invasion of Ukraine began. At the same time, the share of EU exports to Russia dropped from 3.8% to 1.4%. This shows how interlinked the Russian and EU economies were before the war in Ukraine. Moreover, the biggest beneficiary of Russian gas in Europe was Germany. In 2021, Germany accounted for almost half of its gas imports from Russia. Due to this reason, when trade stopped between Russia and Germany due to the war, the energy price in Germany increased by tenfold. Giving you the idea, it increased from just €34 per megawatt hour to €469 per megawatt hour. But regardless of the EU's efforts to stop the war in Ukraine, it is still on the horizon. The collapse of Russian energy supplies to Europe left no other option for German leaders, and they had to take a more proactive approach to addressing their energy concerns. So that's where the German leadership took a bold step in its national policy. The German Chancellor proposed a $194 billion aid package to relieve domestic consumers and production companies. Simply put, Germany utilizes its fiscal power to bail out its own businesses because it was struggling with an energy crisis. The main objective of this aid package was to protect households and companies from the impact of ever-increasing energy prices. As per this new plan, there will be an emergency price break on oil and gas prices. Also, subsidies are to be provided to small and medium-sized businesses. Moreover, to avoid dependence on Russian energy, Germany also proposed to expand its renewable energy and liquefied gas terminals. For Germany, this subsidy means tackling the energy crisis and maintaining the living standards of its citizens. Regardless of its benefits, this subsidy also raises concerns for the whole European Union. The question arises, how can the whole collective unit be endangered through this deal? The primary issue is that there is an economic difference between European states. This difference is due to the size of the economy and the debt to GDP ratio. As per the December 2023 report, Germany has a 75% debt to GDP ratio, while other countries like France, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, and Italy have a ratio exceeding 100%. This shows that these countries are not that economically powerful to provide these kinds of subsidies. This could start a subsidy war between the EU member states to counter the economic collapse. Another possibility is that other EU members may impose import duties on German products. As the European Union works as a single unit, there are many roles this organization shares. Firstly, this collective unit enjoys several benefits like financial cooperation and the facilitation of trade. Secondly, the EU also has a strong military alliance that works on the notion of collective security and safeguarding EU territories. So these German subsidies threaten the balance of the whole system, as this bailout package will strengthen German companies and business entities. Due to this, a more competitive environment will be created. But other countries are not that economically powerful and cannot provide this kind of relief to their companies and businesses. So Germany will outperform all the other financially less stable countries. This will result in the collapse and bankruptcy of other member states. Not only this, the German subsidy rules out the core principle of the European Union, which is balance and cooperation. Due to their different sizes and resources, EU member countries own the same power in the EU Parliament. But these subsidies undermine the EU's principles and imbalance the economic fabric of the EU. If this development takes place, then there is a possibility that EU countries may withdraw their support for Ukraine. Despite this, they would prioritize their own citizens and their welfare instead of granting money to back Ukraine in war. Adding to that, if the subsidy war intensifies, winter becomes colder, and energy prices get high, then inflation may badly affect the living standards of people. That would have a negative impact on the overall economy. So all in all, the NATO alliance could be in jeopardy, as the EU may compromise its status to fund NATO every year in defense budgets. That may result in the collapse of NATO in the EU. That is the reason every EU country will prefer its own citizens and stop supporting the war in Ukraine. The whole narrative means that Russia will be in a win-win situation. Vladimir Putin has already stated that Russia is at an advantage, while the EU is at a sheer loss. He said this after the West and the US put economic sanctions on Moscow. After the latest subsidy schemes by Berlin, Moscow stands a chance to win this war, because a weak NATO backing will strengthen Russian influence in the region. Moreover, Russia will be quite happy when its rival, the US, loses its hegemony in Europe. Now, wrapping this up, this shows that being the largest economy in the European Union, Germany is the Achilles heel for Europe. If it adopts these kinds of policies that are more pro-national, then the EU's bloc may be compromised. That means the overall objective of the EU as the largest independent union will be in the dust. As mentioned earlier, the European Union is an autonomous bloc meant to further the interests of the whole union. But Germany has shifted the whole paradigm by financially empowering the domestic market and the common people. This is a good gesture for a country, but for analysts, it may prove a last nail in the coffin for Europe's economy. What are your thoughts about it? Do you think that German subsidies will destroy Europe's economy and help Russia? Let us know in the comments section. For more such videos and hot topics, check out our next video and don't forget to subscribe.